Good morning. Welcome to the IA Global Asset Management's quarterly podcast, where our portfolio managers and asset class experts discuss current market events, trends, portfolio allocation, and outlook. My name is Rose Marcello. I'm a client portfolio manager at IEGAM, and my guest today is Marc Gagnon, portfolio manager, North American Equities. Marc is an award-winning portfolio manager with a long track record in Canadian equity, real estate income, and small cap strategies. Good morning, Marc.
Good morning, Rose. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. We're here to discuss Canadian equities, but specifically, Canadian equities have had a terrific year in 2024. I would like to discuss today how persistent that performance could be and catalysts for returns in 2025. But we'll also talk about the differential in valuations versus US stocks, as well as the risks to the Canadian economy stemming from the upcoming Trump administration. Does that work for you?
That works for me.
Perfect. So my first question is about President-elect Trump, who's being certified today. He has threatened to impose tariffs on goods and services coming from Canada. What could be the impact of these tariffs on the Canadian economy?
Well, of course, if we look at the scenario that Trump mentioned earlier this fall about, having a tariff of 25% on almost everything that we export to the US, that would be extremely negative for the Canadian economy. There's no doubt about that. But, in the same time, we can think that for different reasons, he's not going to go as far as that. Let's talk, for example, about the energy, where he needs our natural gas, he needs our oil to keep the cost of eating and the cost of driving, at the pump, gasoline at the pump, and at a price that wouldn't trigger inflation. So it would be surprising that he would do something that would be that damaging for his own economy. He can do it, but it would be a surprise. So somehow we expect that, it might not be on everything, and it might not be also as not as high as 25%. We started with 10, and we have seen, some reaction from the Canadian dollar that, would already raise about 4 to 5% of that 10%. So that would be much more manageable at this level. But yeah, of course, that's going to be a very topical, point or a topic that we will monitor very closely at the beginning of 2025.
Speaking of the Canadian currency, Canadian dollar, as you mentioned, we've already seen some impact. It hit a low in the fourth quarter of 2024. What influence might this have on the Bank of Canada's monetary policy in the coming year?
Yes, that's an important point because currency movements are the first, reaction to try to equilibrate for the problems that the tariff would cause. We have seen the Canadian dollar weaken because the market thinks, and rightfully so, that if there's tariff, the Canadian economy would suffer, and then a weak economy equal a weak currency, domestic currency, and that's why we saw the Canadian dollar going lower. The problem is when the Canadian dollar is lower compared to the US and other currency, it means that we have to pay more for what we buy that come outside Canada. And of course, there's a lot of goods that are in that situation. And then we import inflation. And the mandate of the Bank of Canada, the first and most important mandate, is to limit inflation. So in that case, we see in the case of potential tariff from the U.S., what the Bank of Canada would like to do is to lower interest rate. But if you lower interest rate, that also could weaken the Canadian dollar, and therefore that limits their margin of maneuver to lower it, because if they do so in the existence of tariff, that will probably import inflation, and that's probably something that would be a bit negative also for the Canadian economy. The limitation in the margin of maneuver of the Bank of Canada to react to those tariffs from Trump.
Interesting. I want to talk about the performance of the Canadian stock market in 2024, which recorded substantial gains. In your opinion, is could this continue this year? And
Uh,
what do you what do
sorry.
you think will be the main performance catalyst for the Canadian stock market this year?
Yeah, when you said that could it continue this year, I was we all are dreaming about, that kind of year, 20% for, our
We
portfolio.
are.
So I was so excited, to talk about, that 20%. But yeah, that's why I jumped a bit too soon in the conversation. But nevertheless, I think that 2025 uh, of course, that depends of those tariff that we already alluded, but let's think that they're not going to be 25% on every sectors possible that we export more than we import to the U.S. I think that could be a positive scenario for the Canadian stock market in that case, especially if China also is not targeted as much as Trump wants to advertise at this level because China is, as we know, quite important for the worldwide economy, especially in terms of commodities. And the Canadian stock market is very well exposed to commodities. We have to think about copper, oil. Gold also can be part of that group of stocks of exposures. So I think that in that scenario, that would be positive. Maybe we're not gonna, earn 20%, that this year again, but you also have to think positively about the fact that even though right now it doesn't look like it, but we have seen the Bank of Canada cutting rates substantially in 2024. They will try to continue that into 2025. And at one point, we're going to see economy accelerate again. So let's say that the tariff are not that bad, and then you see some, better economic activity, and the market, that the stock market like to looks forward about 6 months. We used to say, well, then, somewhere in 2000, the first part of 2025, I think that the Canadian market could offer very interesting opportunities, and investor will look interested in that market.
Well, um, we're on the case of Canadian equities and valuations. I'd like now to turn the attention to the differential versus the US counterparts, where it's much cheaper in Canada. Does this represent an opportunity for investors, or is this justified maybe by risks that are unique to the Canadian market?
Well, I think that what's going on right now, it's as you said, there's some risk reflected in the Canadian market, being mainly the tariff. If you remove those risks, or they are less than the worst case scenario that I think that people are quite nervous about these days, you have that catalyst because you're right. Valuation, the disc. Well, I wouldn't say the disconnect, but let's say the difference between the U.S. and the Canadian valuation on the main indices is as high as ever it has ever been. So yeah, when you have a market that is not expansive, what does it mean? It's mean that it's less risky. There's less chances to see it, correct. So. I think that's an important aspect of why the Canadian market is interesting. Of course, the U.S. market has some growth, especially with AI, but valuation already reflect a good part of that growth. So they are a little more vulnerable to, potential. We don't know exactly how things will unfold to potential disappointments. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that in the case of tariff being not as severe as fear by most of the investors out there, I think that Canada has a very interesting opportunity, yeah, in front of it.
Okay, so everything is open. I'd say if we were to summarize the conversation we've just had, it all really depends on what's going to happen with the Trump administration.
Yeah, and if we want to end on a very I think it's a very positive note. This morning, the Washington Post published an article about the fact that it seems that the Trump administration is already working on some tariffs that are targeted, very targeted to critical industries for the U.S. Economy, but also the U.S. nation, like, for example, defense, also biotech. And that's exactly what we could be perceived as a less severe scenario. Of course, Trump denied those claims, but when there's some rumors like that, usually there's smoke, there's fire, and I think that the fact that three different people were mentioned in that article is really, make that possibility, not too far-fetched, let's say.
So ending there on a positive note. Thank you so much for your time, Mark.
It was my pleasure, Rose.
Have a great day.